Hello. Can you hear me well? This is Ivana.
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, Ivana, I can hear you well.
Actually, can I have a question?
Sure, go ahead.
I just tried to click on share screen because I have a presentation and it says that the host disabled participant screen sharing. Would it be possible to enable it?
Yes, it's very possible. Let me do that right now.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think you can share now. Try it.
Yes, perfect. Now it's working. Thank you.
Welcome, Jerome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay.
Hello, everyone. Good evening from Uganda. I hope we are all doing well. Just to let you all know, the webinar is live on YouTube, and then also it is going to be recorded. My names are Francis Obonyo Alphonse. I am the network officer for the Genida network, and I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar seeking to examine the UN Secretary General's Action Agenda on internal displacement. As we all know, at the end of December 2019, the UN Secretary General established a high-level panel on internal displacement. The panel had several findings and made recommendations which have been streamlined into the UN Secretary General's agenda on internal displacement. The agenda has three interlinked goals for the UN states and other actors to achieve. For example, help IDPs find durable solutions to their displacement, prevent new displacement crises from emerging disasters, and then ensure those facing displacements receive adequate protection and assistance. So we are gathered here today to basically examine this, and with us we are fortunate to have key players and key actors on the area of internal displacement in different places across the world. I will move on to let our panelists introduce themselves. We request that you put on your video. We shall start with you, Ivana.
Thank you. Just to say, I cannot turn on the video. It says that the host disabled it. So I think there's something you allow me to do. But in the meantime, I can introduce myself. My name is Ivana Hajmanova, and I'm the regional coordinator at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, which is based in Geneva, in Switzerland. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you so much, Ivana. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah, no, I'm Mark Yarnell. I'm an advisor with the GP 2.0 global platform on internal displacement, a broad network of policymakers and practitioners engaged in addressing internal displacement, based here in Geneva as well, and previously was on the staff of the high-level panel on internal displacement. Yeah, and the same thing that I'm showing that I can't start my video, but it might be for the best late on a Friday afternoon, so no problem.
Okay, thank you for that. I've just enabled video. If you're able to, please feel free. Thank you. Apologies for that.
Good evening. I'm Inês Raimundo from Mozambique, and I'm also working for Eduardo Mondlane University. I'm a researcher and I've been working on issues of IDPs, including refugees, for quite a couple of years. So in this moment, in this forum, I come in as a capacity of a researcher and also as one who has been affected by these events that have provoked or caused the IDPs. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor. Jerome, I think it's you left.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure that it was me. Thanks, and thanks for the video. I didn't pull a shirt for nothing. Jérôme Elie, head of forced migration at the International Council of Voluntary Agencies in Geneva, IGVA. It's a global network of NGOs. I'll give a few more details later. And we've been engaged quite a lot with Mark and others at the time of the panel and now on the action agenda, helping NGOs to connect with the process, basically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Once again, thank you for taking the time to help us examine this agenda, because we, as the network, would also really want to know how we can use it with the current situation. We've all seen the wash on social media on the floods in Nigeria. We've heard of the drought in the Horn of Africa, the floods in East Africa, and a lot of other disasters, and then conflicts that are continuing to spread across Africa. And this agenda is what we are hoping to use to help us come up with durable solutions to help us navigate these atrocities that are constantly happening. I will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is us having a presentation from GP 2.0. Mark Yanel, over to you.
Great, thanks so much. I'll share my screen so that I can let's see, share. All right. Are you able to see that? Francis?
Yes, I am.
Okay, okay, good. Sorry, I can't see you, so I just have to ask. Great, yeah. So I'll just give a brief bit of background and overview on how the action agenda came to be, some of its origination, and then just give a brief overview of some of the key elements, particularly as they relate to informing national and local strategies and policies on internal displacement. So to get into the action agenda, it's first important to reference the work of the high-level panel on internal displacement. So in 2019, after a request was made by 57 member states to the Secretary General, the Secretary General decided to establish a high-level panel on internal displacement, and this was, it was around the time following the establishment and the drafting of the Global Compact on Refugees and the Global Compact on Migration, neither of which addressed the real issue of internal displacement too significantly, and there wasn't necessarily appetite for another compact for this topic in particular, but there was a recognition that something needed to be done to change the approach and improve how countries, organizations, the UN, all of us address and respond to internal displacement. So he, in late 2019, announced the establishment of a high-level panel, which met beginning in early February 2020. And this feels like the before times. This photo was, we met in Geneva with the high-level panel just several weeks before everything was shut down from COVID, but at the very least did have that chance to meet in person with the Secretary General. And this is a photo of the SG alongside the panel members, and the panel was co-chaired by Donald Caberuca and Federica Mogherini. The panel was also supported by an expert advisor group, and I am very pleased to see that Professor Beth Ferris is on the call as well, and she was one of the members of that expert group. So I may pull her in to provide any thoughts or answer particular questions, since she played such a significant role in that. And so the main thing is that the panel engaged in a process with receiving significant inputs, quite substantial consultations with IDPs themselves, engagements with governments, and then in September 2021 published its report that it submitted to the Secretary General. And is it working? Can you see the slides okay?
We're still on the first one, on the initial slide. So since you mentioned the picture.
Is it, what's it showing now?
It's showing the United Nations Secretary General Action Agenda on Internal Displacement, the opening slide, slide 1.
Okay, and now nothing? No change?
No.
Oh man. such a beautiful slideshow. All right, I'll try to share one more time, and if not, then I'll just give a short presentation and can send the slides through later. All right. Let's see here. All right. Is it moving now?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So the picture I was referring to, here's the members of the panel alongside Secretary General Antonio Guterres. So in September 2021, submitted its report, and just in terms of overall emphasis of the report, just wanted to shine a very bright spotlight on just how severe the crisis is and the implications in terms of numbers that are constantly increasing in terms of the number of people displaced, the numbers of people in long-term protracted displacement, the fact that people are displaced often for a multitude of causes that often interrelate and intersect, and it's not just conflict or disasters, but sometimes a combination of multiple factors that people in displacement face quite extensive human suffering, and then the broader implications of the fact that the scale and severity of this crisis really hampers the ability of countries and societies to progress towards the sustainable development goals. So the report called for fundamental change in approach to move away from addressing internal displacement only as a humanitarian crisis, and something that really brought forward the national ownership and responsibility and accountability of governments. There's with the recognition that IDPs are citizens and residents of the countries in which they're displaced, and so their rights must be recognized as such. And so the panel put forward 10 core recommendations in line with, or to address the key findings it put forward, including ensuring that solutions are nationally owned, doing more work to catalyze political will, ensuring the whole of society is invested, getting the private sector more involved. This one, number 5, making the UN fit for purpose, I'll come back to in a minute since it's directly related to the action agenda. Ensuring there's better access to financing for solutions, making better use of data, looking at root causes and the drivers of displacement, strengthening protection and assistance, and ensuring there's strong follow-up, again, of which the action agenda is a part. These are all quite broad headlines, and the quite a number of more detailed recommendations within each. And I think something that's particularly relevant to this group is in the third main recommendation, ensuring the whole of society is invested. There's a specific recommendations to ensure that efforts are made to create and to expand and support networks of researchers working on internal displacement, particularly in the global south and displacement affected countries. And so there's just a recognition of the role of academics and researchers, not only to promote more analysis and understanding of this complex topic, but also to inform governments and other policymakers and UN agencies that are involved in responding. So that's a point that the panel really wanted to put forward. And then when it comes to this number 5, make the UN fit for purpose, this is sort of where the action agenda comes into play. So following the submission of this report, there was also a call in the report on the Secretary General to take strong leadership in how the UN would get its own house in order and bring more leadership and accountability to internal displacement. And so that's sort of how following the submission of the report, the SG and his team and a number of UN agencies got together to basically, based on the main findings and recommendations in the much broader report of the high-level panel, to put forward specific commitments of the UN system in terms of better addressing internal displacement and looking holistically at solutions, prevention, and protection, as facets they're all interrelated, rather than looking at sort of separate siloed aspects of addressing displacement. And so there are calls to other actors in terms of government, civil society, and so forth. But the SG made clear in putting forward this agenda that this represents his, based on the report, his vision for how the UN system can improve its approach to internal displacement, and overall, with this quote here, the panel report had a was pushing the idea that we can't continue with the status quo, and I think the SG was a bit more punchy with the message is simple: more of the same is not good enough. And so just a quick overview of some of the key UN commitments. So it's to make sure the UN system is better at including the involvement of IDPs in solutions planning, for the UN actors to support states as they develop and implement whole of government approaches to responding to displacement, support the response to urban displacement more effectively, and then more specifically, strengthening UN leadership and accountability with the new appointment of a special advisor on solutions to internal displacement, and also with the establishment of a new interagency steering group, which again is really to help get the UN house in order when it comes to predictability, accountability, leadership, and especially on solutions to internal displacement, since that was something the SG was particularly focused on, given the numbers of people in protracted displacement. At the country level, the designation of UN resident coordinators to lead on solutions was an important commitment. The UN agencies are called upon to develop their own institutional plans for how they're going to increase capacity and their own commitment to prioritizing getting to solutions on displacement. There's a commitment on, in addition to strengthening accountability to IDPs, but working more through local systems and local civil society actors. An effort to scale up the work on climate change adaptation. And then another key point is to engage in solutions from the onset of a crisis, and make sure that the key actors that can play a role, including humanitarian to help lay the foundation, but also development financiers, the role of government, other actors involved in development, peace actors, are part of the effort right from the beginning. And it isn't not a sequence of we'll do humanitarian now and then solutions later. And I was just yesterday on a call with some colleagues who work with IOM in Ukraine, and they recognizing that at the same time as there are many people in need of immediate humanitarian response, it's not too soon to begin engaging on how people who need support can already begin to make steps towards longer term solutions. And so this effort of solutions from the start is a key effort there, even if some more traditional humanitarian actors are a bit cautious about that. And so it again, one thing as I wanted to emphasize, it's a document of UN commitments, but the SG in the action agenda, in multiple instances, indicates how it's a shared plan. It can't be done by the UN alone. There's a need for UN to work in close partnerships with all key actors, re-emphasizing the primary role of governments themselves to take the responsibility and ownership to provide protection and facilitate solutions for their displaced citizens and residents. And so I think that's just an important point to make, is that the specific concrete commitments that are in the agenda come from the UN system, but it's an effort to make a call to a wider range of actors who also are required to take stepped-up action to see real progress on the ground. And then just to give this is my last slide, just to give a quick example of how the panel report and the action agenda interrelate, and how there's a need for a broader, I think, as important as the action agenda is, to sort of consider the broader implications and the broader efforts that are needed to make concrete progress. So an example, when it comes to the role of states, in the report of the high-level panel, there's a recommendations that states should integrate addressing internal displacement in their national and local development plans. And the way this is addressed in the action agenda is it's a UN commitment that the UN will support states to embed solutions within national and local development plans. But it takes both actors to step up, not just the UN. And so that's why, yeah, I'm really glad that this meeting and discussion is on the action agenda, but want to make sure that we're also broadening the lens to recognize that the action agenda is vital and essential, but is put forward with the purpose of looking at where the UN can step up its work, but it doesn't mean that there isn't also the need for all kinds of other actors to really redouble what they're doing and how they're engaging. So I'll stop there, but thank you so much, and I'm glad that the screen sharing worked eventually.
Thank you very much, Mark.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that background. We appreciate that, as we shall go into detail with more questions, which I believe I've already started getting on my end. I will move on to the next person. That would be you, Ivana. Help us understand the statistics on internal displacement in relation to this agenda.
Thank you very much. And just I will apologize in advance. I will turn off my camera for the presentation because I'm in a hotel and it seems like my connection is not very stable. So I think it will be a bit heavy to have my camera on and share the slides. So just going. Okay, so let me share my screen with the presentation. So I hope you are seeing it now, and please do let me know if the slides are not changing or something, just interrupt me. So as Francis said, I will be presenting on internal displacement statistics and how this can be used to advance the UNSG's action agenda. So at the beginning, I will present a few of the global statistics, and I will also focus specifically on sub-Saharan Africa. So first of all, this is a global overview of internal displacement movements over the past decade. As you can see, disaster displacement is more prevalent than conflict displacement, but there are several reasons for it. For instance, preventive evacuations account for a large number of these disaster displacements, while for conflict, preventive evacuations are not that common. So that's one of the explanations why disaster displacement might be quite higher. If you look at the last year, so I'm just trying to make the animation work on my slide while I'm sharing. Here we go. 38 million internal displacement were recorded globally. So it includes people who were displaced more than once in a year, given there were several disasters hitting the same area or disasters and then conflict hitting an area. So it might be one person displaced several times during the year, and the number is 38 million. Now, when we look at where sub-Saharan Africa stands Globally, again, looking only at the 2021 data right now, you can see that it accounted for 14.1 million internal displacements. A large part of the graphic is in orange, which shows conflict and violence, which was 11.5 million, so more than 3/4 of the total figure for the continent or for the region, while disasters displaced 2.5 million, of course, 2.5 million displacements. In total, compared to the 38 million global figure, this accounts for 37% of the global total. So it's a quite important part of the global figure, which goes only to the region of sub-Saharan Africa, and something very concerning for the continent. And now if you look also at this graphic on movements, just for the sub-Saharan Africa region for the past 10 years, you can see quite clearly that conflict displacements are on the rise, and there was a very sharp increase last year due to the ongoing conflict in northern Ethiopia, and disaster displacement a bit under it, so quite different to the global figures where disaster displacement is higher. On average, each year in the past 10 years, 5.1 million new displacements or internal displacement were recorded as a result of conflict and violence. So very high figure, but again, it's just an average, and 2.6 due to disasters. So more or less half, but still a very important figure. Now, when we look at conflict displacement specifically, again, this refers to figures as of 2021. We are currently working on the figures for 2022. You can see that in the top 10 countries which were most affected by conflict displacements, there are 7 which are located in sub-Saharan Africa. So very concerning statistic again, with Ethiopia topping the list, followed by Democratic Republic of the Congo, and then there are a few other countries such as Burkina Faso, Somalia, and so on. And overall, the sub-region accounted for 80% of the global total when it comes to conflict and violence-induced internal displacement. So significant, very significant number. When you look at the same, but when it comes to disasters, the numbers are a bit, there is less disaster displacement global in Africa compared to other regions. There are 3 countries in the top 10, which is, again, quite concerning as well, with Democratic Republic of the Congo, again, very high on the list, and then other 2 countries followed. But disaster displacement is affecting largely countries in Southeast and East Asia, because of the huge number of people living there in highly exposed areas. But as you can see, 3 African countries, despite that, made it to the top 10. If we stay in displacement induced by disasters, we can also see, look at the data for the past 10 years, and we see that most disaster displacement is caused by floods, either riverine floods or flash floods, more than 80% of the total figure. And then around 8% goes to storms. Those are mostly cyclones affecting southern and eastern Africa, so from the Indian Ocean. And there is an important caveat about drought, because all this data goes back to 2012, except for drought, but we have data only since 2017. So there is a significant amount of data which is probably missing, and the percentage for drought is highly likely much higher than 8%. And here you can see the figures for the past 10 years. Flooding causing 20 million internal displacements in the past 10 years, and a few other figures. So now I have been talking about internal displacements or movements. So how many displacements happen each year. Now, if we look at the total number of IDPs, we can see it here. So it's the number of people who didn't manage to find a durable solution before the end of the year, and they remain displaced as of the 31st of December. I think this graphic for the region is extremely concerning because you can see a very steady increase, and basically the number way more than doubled in the past 10 years. So we are now at 25.1 million IDPs living at the continent as of the 31st of December, plus 2 million as a result of disasters. And basically this figure has been increasing steadily since 2014. And we are already afraid that in 2022, in December, we will see that the figure will be yet even higher than at the end of last year. So there will be yet another increase. Last thing, when it comes to statistics, is just looking at the countries which are most affected and where most IDPs lived at the end of the year. So most IDPs who didn't find durable solutions to their displacement. Democratic Republic of the Congo is the first one with more than 5 million IDPs. And then it goes down to Ethiopia, Nigeria, and others. I mean, you can see them on the screen. And when we look at disasters, those are the statistics for the top 5 countries. As you can see in both columns, you can see countries, sort of similar countries or the same countries. So we see that they are the same countries affected by both disaster displacement and conflict displacement. So then obviously it's much harder to confront the challenge if you need to deal with both triggers. And at the same time, in many of these countries, we see that those people have been displaced for many years or even decades. So it's not, we are talking about people who have been living in displacement, some of them all of their life, or very significant part of their lives. And this needs to be considered when seeking durable solutions for them. Now, this is one last slide on the statistics. This is a life map, which is on our website. And you can actually see this is last 30 days that there's new bubbles appearing every day. This map is updated every day, and you can see that the displacement is ongoing all the time. So that's why I'm saying there will be probably another increase on the data this year. Now we have all these very concerning statistics, and how can we use these statistics to achieve these 3 goals we were just very well presented by my colleague Mark on achieving durable solutions, prevent displacement, and provide sufficient protection and assistance to IDPs. So we'll give you a few examples how this data can be used, and also a few examples on how it's already being used. So the first goal on durable solutions, achieving durable solutions for IDPs. So already we have a lot of data available, which is especially disaggregated. We have this data at IDMC, but also a lot of this data is provided by our partners in their own data sets. And this data can be used and is already being used for a better targeted provision of services and investments in infrastructure. For example, if we know that there is a large population of IDPs living in urban areas, we can better plan for the urban development. And also if we, for example, know that they do not want to return, they want to remain and locally integrate, this knowledge and knowing that they are there can help us very much to target and plan for better investments in different areas of a country. The same applies to sex and age disaggregation. A lot of this data, again, is already available. We have this data at IDMC in our database, but also a lot of our partners have this data very specific for certain regions, certain countries in their own databases, and a lot of it is available publicly. And again, I think it's quite obvious that a lot of that female-led households will have very different needs to achieve durable solutions than elderly males, for example. And so we need to know who the IDPs are, because it's far from one homogeneous group. And this data can help us, is already helping us to provide durable solutions to them. At the same time, another tool which we have at IDMC, and there are many other partners again out there which are using similar tools, it's to have data on the severity of displacement, which help us to highlight priority areas for intervention. through different qualitative indicators, which are assessing IDPs' living conditions and their needs. And this way, we can see that in certain areas, IDPs are more in need of livelihood support in order to achieve durable solutions. In other areas, they are more in need of reconstruction assistance for their housing so that they can achieve durable solutions. So this data is also available and ready to be used. And last, we are also collecting data on monitoring progress and seeing what different solutions are being offered or are being implemented by IDPs themselves, and how this is helping them achieve durable solutions and how this could be replicated in other areas. So again, we have data on that, us and other organizations, and this can be readily used for implementation in other countries. Now, one example from a country for this goal 1, it's initiative from Somalia, which is called Damwadag. The consortium uses a data collection tool, which is based on the YASC, sorry, I'm messing up now with the acronym, YASC Durable Solutions Framework, and the REDS, which is the Regional Durable Solutions platform, Interagency Standing Committee. That's what YASC stands for. So they're using the criteria from these 2 frameworks for their data collection tool. And they are conducting household level surveys to understand displacement-specific challenges and vulnerabilities. And based on that, they are prioritizing its durable solutions programming, prioritizing resources, and adapting programming. So basically, through this tool, they are collecting the data, which I was just showing in the previous slide. On the data is spatially disaggregated, it's sex and age disaggregated, and they have very clear idea about the needs in different areas. And they are providing targeted assistance for the people to achieve durable solutions. And it's being quite successful until these days. So something which would be replicated in other countries. Now, when we look at the second goal, which links to better prevention, for the understanding, to plan and prepare better, we need to understand how displacement occurred in the past. And based on that, to understand what can happen in the future. A key to that is to analyze seasonality. This is quite good when it comes to disaster displacement. And this graphic is showing the frequency of displacement per month in the past 10 years across the sub-Saharan Africa region. And you can see clear spikes in certain months, and these spikes in displacement correspond perfectly with different rainy seasons in different regions in Africa. And again, by knowing that and seeing the levels of displacement, you can already think about what levels of annual precipitation or seasonal precipitation occurred during one specific year, what level of displacement occurred, and then seeing the forecast for the next rainy season. It can already help you to plan a bit better for displacement, or even try to prevent it if you know in which areas people would be most vulnerable. At the same time, and indirectly, this can also help us prevent resource-based conflict in a way, because we see that in many areas when disasters hit, people lose their livelihoods, and then it can lead to additional tensions in the areas and conflict. So basically, by knowing the seasonality of disasters, we can also prevent some tensions and potentially conflict. Now, again, one example how prevention and data is used for prevention. It's an example from West Africa, from the whole region. There is a network or analysis group, which is called Granite. And they are developing an early warning and monitoring tool on the situation in the Gulf of Guinea countries. And basically, they are, I think they do it on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis. It includes analysis on displacement, and they are basically looking at displacement data, comparing it with other data on conflict, on disasters. And based on that, they are issuing early warning alerts of what can happen in the next period, I think 1 or 2 months. And then it can again help to plan better and try to prevent displacement where possible. Now the last goal, which is linked to effective assistance and protection. So in order to provide that for IDPs, we again need disaggregated data, because as I said a moment ago, IDPs are not one homogeneous group. We need to understand their sex, age, disability, knowing where they are, when they were displaced, and all that. And we also need to record how many times these people were displaced, because it can help us a lot in providing assistance to them, because with each displacement, people tend to become more and more vulnerable, economically, socially, psychologically, and therefore the assistance for someone who is displaced for the first time might be quite different from someone who got displaced for the fifth or sixth time. So we need this data. Now, when it comes to the disaggregation, but also the repeated displacements, I have a very interesting map to show you, which shows Nigeria. And I think Nigeria was mentioned just in the introduction of the webinar. This is a coverage of the internal IOM displacement tracking metrics, so a tool which collects data on internal displacement, and they are covering these states in Nigeria and periodically update the internal displacement data. And this map shows the average annual precipitation, so rains, how much rain is affecting different areas of the country. And as you can see, the areas which are most affected by rains, by floods, and by disaster displacement are actually not covered by the IOM-DTM assessment. There are other partners collecting data, but it's not a systematic data collection. And there's not that much information when it comes to needs. And so obviously it will be much harder to target those people and apply for effective assistance and their protection if we actually don't have the data on the people who in the areas where they are displaced in the southern states. So this is just one example of what could be done. My very last slide on the presentation also links to this third goal on effective assistance and protection. And it's just a small note when it comes on data on the impacts of small-scale disasters, because we tend to look a lot on big conflict events and big disaster events because they call a lot of attention from the media, and there are millions of people on the move, so obviously it calls a lot of attention. However, what our statistics show is that, especially in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in the past 10 years, there were only 5 events which displaced between 500,000 and 1 million people. Actually, most of the events which we recorded displaced less than 10,000 people, a lot of them just between 100 and 1,000. And those disasters do not get a lot of attention, but they might have very significant impacts on small communities, on local communities. And there might be people living for years in displacement, and they might go completely underreported and under our radar. So this is just a call to also pay attention to these small scale events, because then if many of them add up together, it can add up to quite significant number. And by not considering these people in our planning response durable solutions, we might be actually forgetting about a lot of IDPs who deserve our assistance and attention. And on that note, I'm going to end, and do let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. We appreciate you for that very detailed statistical analysis of internal displacement and how we can relate it to the agenda. The questions will come in after the panel discussion. I will now move on to the next presenter. That will be you, Jerome. Ivana has given us the statistics. She has also given us examples of what is being done with regards to durable solutions. Under the ICVA network, I stand to be corrected. One of your objectives is to help organizations work together and collaborate for to come up with joint solutions towards issues like internal displacement. Tell us your side of ICVA. How do we now work together in relation to this agenda?
Thanks. Thanks a lot. I won't have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll try to be, I already can say that I won't be as comprehensive as my two predecessors. Thanks for those great presentation, and that set the scene quite well for my presentation. Yeah, as you said, my organization, ICVA, the International Council of Voluntary Agencies, is a global network of NGOs, big and small. Our mission is to make, broad mission is to make humanitarian action more principled and effective, and our work on internal displacement has led us to support NGOs' engagement with processes like the high-level panel on internal displacement in 2020-21. During that time, we helped NGOs connect with the panels through regular meetings, focused discussions. We also supported a bit at the initial phase in setting up a process to ensure feedback from displaced and affected communities. Not that we are a direct role in it, because we don't have boots on the ground. We are in kind of coordination organization, but we helped set up the system initially. During the development of the action agenda, we worked on basically to maintain this role and relationship that we had developed during the high-level panel in a way that would basically allow us to continue playing a similar role vis-a-vis the action agenda, although hoping to have a more practical action-oriented approach. And especially because the action agenda, as Mark highlighted, does mention NGOs, specific stakeholders in the agenda, and for some of the activities. So for my presentation, you asked me to focus on the challenges, and I did a bit potential opportunities with regard to the implementation of the action agenda, how it is going and how we see it going. And as you probably understood, I will focus on the NGO perspective in doing so. I won't repeat what the action agenda is. I think Mark did a good job on that. But the first step in my presentation is basically to understand what implementation means. And this is also the first challenge. Basically, what are the actions in the agenda, and who will be driving the implementation and how? So what are the actions in the agenda? Simple answer was provided actually by Mark in his presentation, is that the action agenda presents a set of 31 commitments that should translate into action. Those are mainly UN commitments, but it is clear that other actors, including NGOs, can support, engage in efforts to fulfill those commitments and bring their own perspective to that. So there is scope for NGOs to play a role, but the role is not necessarily straightforward for a number of reasons. Some of the commitments are still rather vague and generic, and do not really lend themselves easily to direct interventions. The entry points for NGOs are not immediately clear, although in those situations, NGOs can always also be propositional. So that's also the opportunity side of the challenge. Second, some of the commitments clearly target or engage specific constituencies, possibly excluding others, at least on paper. And again, it needs to be seen whether what's on paper can evolve or not in some of the other parts. Third, the 31 commitments actually do not encompass all the actions. So there is a need to not just read the 31 commitments, but read the detail of the action agenda, because there are a few more details. There are a few elements there that are not listed in the 31 commitments. And in particular, I would refer you to the last page of the action agenda, and I think one of the last slides of Mark, which highlighted a number of possible actions that are not reflected in the commitments. For example, this idea of a high-level event in 2024 is not in itself, I think, listed as in the commitments. And the fourth element is that ideally NGO engagement on the 31 commitments, would need to be organized and through strategic division of labor, making sure that we have a coherent approach and good use of resources. But at the moment, at least, it may be complicated to reach that point unless we get further clarity on how the commitments will be pursued and what the space for non-UN actors is to contribute. That leads me to my next point, which is who is leading the actions and how. So again, as I think Marx explained or referred to in June, Mr. Robert Piper was appointed and took up his post as a special advisor on solutions to internal displacement. And I think in the approach we have, it is important to understand that while Mr. Piper has a clear responsibility on the first objective, the solutions piece, his role vis-a-vis prevention and protection and assistance is less prominent. There is a bit of a I mean, you need to understand is that his mandate is primarily about solutions. He also oversees the whole action agenda, but in terms of what is driving is really the first objective, the solutions piece. So this may bring up some questions about understanding where accountability really lies for the overall agenda and whom to engage beyond the solutions piece. There's also, again, as mentioned by Mark, a steering group gathering a small number of UN agencies. So far, it includes DCO, IOM, OCHA, UNDP, and UNHCR. And I have to say that beyond what is written on the action agenda, NGOs are yet to fully understand the role and ways of working of this group and how to engage with it. However, there are openings for collaboration since the steering group is supposed to link up and mobilize non-UN actors, and including NGOs, and that's clearly mentioned in the action agenda. And really in the action agenda, it seems that the relationship, because that's also an important element to understand how things are going to unfold, the relationship between the special advisors and the group, steering group, seems to be guided by the fact first that Mr. Piper chairs the steering group, and that Mr. Piper seems to have a more strategic, global, and less operational role than the steering group. But still, you understand that there's still a few question marks, and I think the question marks I've been highlighting so far clearly point to the fact that we are still in the early stages of the process, which, again, keeping to the frame of this presentation, brings its own set of challenges and opportunities. A major challenge in the fact that we're still in the early phases is that the time frame for the action agenda itself is relatively short, about 2 years. And it has become apparent that some elements of the action agenda really require time to be operationalized, and even sometimes require time to be refined conceptually. It is also clear from that perspective that managing expectations will be necessary. There is, I think, a recognition now that the action agenda will not in 24 months resolve all internal displacement issues, but rather aim at establishing a basis to achieve this goal in a more distant future. But of course, this may appear, this will surely appear too slow for those who are facing displacement and their consequences now. On the opportunity side, this is a moment when NGOs can make an impact by feeding their inputs, especially when based on their operational experience. And I have to say that over the past few months, while he was working to define his priorities, his ways of working, and to establish his office in Geneva, Mr. Piper has been quite open to exchanges with a variety of stakeholders, including NGOs. We have organized meetings with him for the IGVA and the Interaction Network, which is another network of NGOs based in the US. This, I think, has been useful in establishing a connection at global level, providing NGO feedback on his early thinking, and of course, still in a better understanding from our side, his objectives and basically how he's going to work. So now the next steps will be to understand how to engage with the priority countries he is going to focus on, as well as the in-country dynamics that will unfold in implementing the action agenda. Because as I said at the beginning, we have this aim of getting a bit useful in the action. Not simply, simply maybe not the right word because it's useful, but in addition to the role that we usually play in convening at the global level, to see if there are ways for us to also help at the concrete implementation level. And this is connected to my last point, which is about country level action. And I'm not going to be able to provide a broad overview of all the issues here, but just to flag a number of them that I think are important in terms of the implementation and the role the NGOs can play. So NGOs are waiting to see a final list of priority countries. We know that this is being worked on. Priority countries where the action agenda will unfold, and we're waiting for that because this is seen as a way to move, as I just explained, from the global conceptual level of discussions to engaging more concretely with actions. So we understand that about 12 to 16 countries will receive specific attention, and that quite a few of those actually important for this meeting today will be in Africa, majority I think of them. While we need to understand what implementation will mean at country level, we can gather some ideas from the action agenda itself and identify some issues to address. One is that, for example, the action agenda mentions specific tools and mechanisms to be set up at country level, as well as roles for lead actors. But again, here further clarity will be needed going forward. For example, displacement affected states are supposed to put in place coordination mechanisms and a whole of government solution strategies in close collaboration with UN resident coordinators. This is related to the UN commitment number 2. It is clear with for our approaches that focus on development-informed solutions to internal displacement, the role of governments is fundamental. I like, in the action agenda, this quote that says that sovereignty comes with responsibility. Maybe because it makes me think of a Spider-Man movie, but it is importantly capturing the primary role of states in answering to their own populations being displaced and dealing with bringing solutions to that. This also certainly brings up known challenges around ensuring political will, resources, and capacity. The funding element will be a difficult one overall, and as always, but especially in contexts where we see humanitarian funding winding down and being meant to be replaced by development funding and actors, but the sequencing of that is not necessarily an easy one. In all that, the role of the resident coordinators, as mentioned a few minutes ago, will be fundamental. And all this will have implications for NGOs' capacity to connect with the processes, especially because often their space, role, and resources are not necessarily well established in this kind of context. Although far from perfect, there are much more established roles for NGOs in humanitarian coordination settings and architectures, where they are seen as relevant actors, often integral parts of deliberations. And I have to say that after discussing with some NGOs that are working in contexts in countries where transition from humanitarian to development approaches is unfolding, my impression is that it comes with difficulties for continued meaningful engagement of NGOs. It seems, and I say it seems because the conditional, because I think there's, at least on my side, there's a need to learn more about that, but it seems that the RCs do not have the same mandate to engage and coordinate NGOs as humanitarian coordinators do. And to address such challenges, it will be necessary to strengthen then the RC's mandate and capacity to engage with NGOs around solutions, maybe with dedicated capacity. On the NGO side, because there's also our side that we need to understand and to mobilize and to find ways to engage. I think it will be important to learn how to engage with the RCs and development mechanisms, at least in some contexts. And one question that I have not yet had the time to look at is whether we can better identify development NGOs that may help in this perspective, especially in the priority countries, because we often engage on the side of the humanitarian NGOs or humanitarian wings, I would say, of dually mandated NGOs. So how can we bring this? What does it mean, development actors, from an NGO perspective? I think there's much more that we could bring here. And this challenge, of course, around NGO participation is even more acute when it comes to ensuring participation and contributions from displaced and affected populations. As Mark showed again, the importance of their engagement is clearly recognized in the action agenda, featuring in its guiding considerations. But at the end of the day, so far, I think the modalities to ensure this participation are not clearly established, and it will be important to ensure that that this participation is consistent and that we're pursuing that consistently. And again, here, I think based on past experience, a number of NGOs are ready to help in this endeavor, and it's not just based on past experience, because we've also heard NGOs being pushing for this aspect. So another challenge that I wanted to highlight is more thematic, and I think that builds also on the previous presentations. And I wanted to point it out because I think it connects with many situations in Africa, and it's about the scope of addressing internal displacement related to climate change and disasters. I have argued in the short paper for the forced migration review that by focusing on prevention, the high-level panel may have missed an opportunity to look at the solution side of displacement related to climate change and disasters. And I think a similar comment may be valid for the action agenda, because it seems to be taking the same approach. It considers how adaptation plans may help in reducing the magnitude of future displacement, a bit as if this was something only for the future. And we see what is happening at the moment in the eastern horn of Africa, as in many other parts of the continent, and actually globally. People have been or are being displaced already by the effects of disasters and hazards, and they need tailored solutions, not necessarily prevention, or at the minimum, efforts are equally needed on both fronts. And at the end of the day, some of the special advisors' priority countries may lend themselves to this specific work. And here again, I'm convinced that a number of NGOs and other stakeholders, of course, that are focused on those issues could support the UN actions and commitments. So I'm not sure how I'm making with time, but I will conclude, because I also think we're quite far in the event itself. So to conclude, I would just want to reemphasize that the implementation of the action agenda is still at an early stage, at global, but especially at the national level. This presents challenges as there is a limited time frame for the action agenda, but we should also think in broader terms about what the action agenda could lead to after the 2 years. More immediately, the next few months will certainly bring further clarity on implementation details, allowing to overcome some of the challenges I highlighted and others that I didn't have time to dwell on. New challenges will probably appear. We can always count on that. But I think there's a number of clarifications that are coming that will be useful in our engagement. And I cannot pretend to speak again for all NGOs, but I do think that quite a number of them do look at the action agenda as an opportunity to improve approaches for solutions on internal displacement, keeping the accent on the centrality of protection, that is important, and on humanitarian imperatives, while also adopting a development focus. So maybe we can have a follow-up to this webinar where we'll give you a sense of whether my analysis of this topic has evolved or not in the next few months. But thank you for the invitation, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jerome. We sincerely appreciate that. Now, you have given us the challenges and then how different NGOs and organizations can come in. And then Ivana has given us the statistics, and Mark has given us a background of the agenda. We have with us Professor Inez, one of the core network members of the Genida network, and she is going to give us using Mozambique as a case study, basing on the information that you have just presented with us, how we can now relate the two. Should also help us point out some of the relatable challenges that you have mentioned, and then also as the questions come in, we shall follow up on that. Over to you, Professor Inez. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfonso, and good evening again to everybody. As I said when I introduced myself, I'll share a little bit about what is happening in Mozambique. And I was just wondered why when Ivana was presenting data, seems that there is not much information about Mozambique, which is this is my feeling on that. And not having data, not having information, obviously will difficult any action or any strategy to assist people or to create the innovative actions or plans for IDPs in Mozambique. Yes. When we talk about Mozambique, one word, one sentence that we can say that resumes Mozambique is Mozambicans amid in natural disasters and military conflicts. This has been happening since 1975, the year that Mozambique got independence from Portugal. Starting from what I said has the voices of some Mozambicans based on places where I've been doing my research on IDPs. People are saying that we are paying the price for changing environmental and climate impact in various ways. The bill has the following features. We are obliged to live in a nomadic lifestyle or are living in temporary shelters or settlements due to floods, droughts, and cyclones. We are no longer producers. We have become beggars. So this is to summarize the situation of Mozambique from north to southern, from east, from west to eastern area of Mozambique. So for those who don't know where Mozambique is located, so Mozambique is one of the Southern African countries and is bordered by several countries, starting from Tanzania, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Eswatini, and the Republic of South Africa. And eastern area lies the Indian Ocean. So this, because of that, in fact, Mozambique has been hit by several cyclones and storms that have caused thousands of IDPs. So when you look at the military conflicts, in fact, as I said at the very beginning, the country deals with disasters, natural disasters, and also with military conflicts. As I said at the beginning, in 1975, the year that Mozambique got independence from Portugal. A year later, in 1976 to 1992, so for 16 years, we had war, a war that nearly produced 5 million of IDPs. We're talking, actually, the population of Mozambique is about 30 million of citizens. But besides these conflicts, military conflicts, we also have, and it's part of that, verbal threats, because when we have verbal threats, people can't settle permanently especially in rural areas. They tend to move from rural areas to urban areas because I think they never know when a bullet will come. They never know when they will be bombed. So these verbal threats, in fact, are also the cause of IDPs in Mozambique. In 2014, we had what we call military hostilities, whose cessation agreement was signed in Maputo on the 5th of September. These military hostilities is another agreement that was signed because that movement that created the 16 years of war was not happy with the election results, and is that the same movement war behind these verbal threats? And in 2015, 2013, in fact, they started to attack people again in central region of Mali. So this ended with this military hostility agreement. And then after that, 3 years later, in 2017, we have what we internally we call the insurgents in northern Mozambique. An uncountable number of IDPs in 3 provinces are what we know actually, that because of these people have been killed, civilians, they've been killed, a lot of people, and destroyed infrastructures, and people are no longer able to produce, no longer able to do what they used to do in the past. So they're living in in cities, and which makes these cities vulnerable for different factors. Myself, I am a product of forced migration. First of all, a product of drought. My great parents, they had to move from a district that is even today is one of the driest districts in southern Mozambique. So they had to move. I am saying that this started by the beginning of 20th centuries. But a century has passed and the same place continued to face drought. The situation has changed. So we can see people continuing to move, and people are moving out and up and down because of drought. But besides, in the same region, besides the drought, we also face floods. But floods didn't force my parents or my relatives to move, but because okay, my parents, they said, oh, okay, we adjusted to the conditions of floods, which is different from condition of the droughts. So if we count the number of events that happened in this particular place where I was born, I can say, for instance, that in 1955, there was one of the highest floods in the region where catfish they were found in the roof of storehouses, and there is so much fish that they decided to making some alcohol from fish. I don't know how good it was, but people they do that in this in that particular condition. In 1978, I was about to drown in the river, the Limpopo River. In 2000, a girl was born on the top of a tree, which is the same place where I'm talking about, where my parents where my great parents were born. And in 2003, again, we had another big flood in the same region. So, what river is causing all these IDPs in the place where I was born? Is the Limpopo River. That Limpopo River comes from South Africa and down and it ends in Mozambique, it's the Indian Ocean. So affects all Gaza province where I was born. But in the same river, in Zimbabwe, this river is quite ambivalent river because it brings happiness and also it brings sadness. Happiness when we have water, okay, people can produce, etc. But the other side, what produces sadness is because when it dries severely, as we can see some of the pictures that were taken in the area where I used to do my study. So in my country, as I said, we have what we call in these movements, events that have forced my family, Mozambicans, and myself to move. We had, besides this, the development projects like communal villages, like we also had the floods and cyclone. We had also production operation. That production operation, it is an operation, has a strategy to reduce informalities and crime in cities. So in 1976, as I said, to 1992, we had the Civil War where thousands of people were displaced and lived as refugees in neighboring countries. Okay, So most recently, what I call the era of cyclones. In fact, talking about cyclones in Mozambique, that happened. But the uniqueness of these cyclones is in terms of the speed now. It's a really cyclones, the speed is in storms, and also the number of people who have been affected and people who have been displaced. The first very time that we had such experience of a huge storm or cyclone, it was in the year of 1984. That one hit the city of Maputo and was followed by heavy rain. Just to have an idea of that cyclone, the speed it was around 90 kilometers per hour. But actually, the storms or cyclones that have hit the countries, they can reach 200 or approximately 300 kilometers per hour. So this is one of the example, one of the evidence that we are in an era of new cyclones, we are in an era of climate change. In 2009 and 2022, we had the Ida cyclone, and immediately, I think a week after the Ida cyclone, we had the Kenneth cyclone that hit two cities and two regions in Mozambique, the Beira city in central Mozambique and the Pemba in northern Mozambique. The particularity of Pemba, it is the place, it is the capital city of Cabo Delgado province. That province that actually is under attack of those people that we name we give them names like insurgent people, like the ISIS, like Al-Shabaab. We don't know. Honestly speaking, I don't know who these people are. But the fact is, since 2017, they've been killed Mozambicans. So in 2022, this year, we had the Eloise cyclone. So all cyclones together have created IDPs. Okay. Armed conflicts. We have armed conflicts in central region of Mozambique. Actually, we have armed conflicts in the north. Previously, was only one province, the Cabo Delgado province. And coincidentally, the attacks started when we were talking about investments on oil and gas in this province. But now, especially this year, we have read on the news that they've started to attack the nearby provinces like Niassa in west and Nampula in south. So what actions and solutions? We are still depending on international aid. That's the truth. From natural disasters to armed conflicts. We are far away from resilience, management of conflicts and disaster. There are a lot of conflicting interests, natural resources exploitation versus environmental protection. So who is interested in this conflict? Because the cause of all of these things, the cause of displacement in Mozambique, the main cause is because of conflicts. And behind this conflict, there are large interests. So the question is, who is interested in these conflicts? Another question that we have regarding to that is how people have been assisted. When we're talking about assistance, how people have been assisted. According to what has been seen, my feeling is that we are still doing business as usual. What does it mean? Assembling people in settlements where people are given shelter that is guaranteeing a place where they can sleep. But at the same time, there is another conflict which is related to land. It's a fact that land belongs to state, okay? But also in Mozambique, we have what we call the land that belongs to our ancestors. Myself, my family, we have lost land because of that. But this is not a problem because it's people need to be protected. people are giving food, people are giving water, and people are giving health kits. But these things are not sustainable. And actually, the feeling that we have now is okay, if any disaster hit, if any conflict hit Mozambique, okay, there's a solution that we have is just relying on aid. What durable solutions that can be applied to Mozambique? As I said, Mozambique is literally under fire, natural disasters and military instability. Researchers like myself are still fighting in getting that data. And I wonder where Ivana get that data, because we researchers internally are fighting together to access to data. How many people have been affected? How many people have been displaced? How many people are living in the settlements? How many people are hiding in the bush or elsewhere? Or how many people are living or being hosted by family? This is really crucial to researchers. So for any action or solutions, we need accurate data. We can't do any durable solution for IDPs. We can't have any solution any durable solution for displacement, because we don't have data. We need data on time. We need data, accurate data. We need to access to data. We need to access to resettlement areas. This is an issue. Actually, I can't decide as a researcher, just go to any resettlement area and starting to interview people or starting to collect data to make for my research. This is actually difficult. We also have to deal with bureaucracy. So this is what, in short, I wanted to share with you about how can researchers, in fact, can contribute to durable solutions. It has been said that this process has to be a participant, but how can a researcher participate in that process without information, without the freedom to enter in this area where can get information? So this is the last point that I wanted to share with you about my experience as an IDPS and also my experience as a researcher on IDPS. And thank you very much for your attention. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Ines. We thank you for sharing with us your experience and what you have gone through as in Mozambique, and then also taking the time to share with us your presentation on that. Now, just to bounce off a few questions on the panelists in reference to what we have the presentations we have had, and then we shall go straight to the questions that we have in the Q&A tab on Zoom. So, Ivana, I think there is a question that, basing on what Professor Ines has said of there being limited data on internal displacement in Mozambique, maybe you could help us understand, could it be that the data was not included, or what's your response to that?
Thank you for the question. So data in Mozambique is included in the global statistics. It might not have featured on the presentation, namely, just because the figures in Mozambique are slightly lower than in some of the other countries. But we do have data from two sources in the country. One of them is IOM internal displacement tracking metrics, which is covering all of the crises in Cabo Delgado, also some of the storms which recently hit the country. And so data from the Institute, I think INGC is the acronym, it's the National Institute for Disaster Management, don't remember the name exactly. So we also use their data. So Mozambique is included. It's that maybe it's not the country most affected by displacement, so that's why it didn't show up on some of the slides. Thank
you very much. Jerome, you had said there priority countries are going to be identified, and then they are going to be engaged. I guess the question that is coming into mind is, based on the presentation that we have given, is that how are these priority countries identified, and how are they going to be engaged in that matter?
Thanks. That would be a question more for the special advisor on solutions. But what I can say is that what I've heard is first that there is an overall goal of trying to ensure that at least 10 million people are put on the path towards solutions to their internal displacement. So that's the overall goal that gather all the countries that would be on those priority lists. And then there's of course criteria I think that are related to are trying to be realistic in terms of whether the conditions in countries are conducive to the objectives and to attaining the objectives and putting in place the action agenda. So Mark and myself, I think we highlighted, we made it clear that at the center there is this notion of government responsibility and ownership. So clearly this is not something that I don't think we'll see in the list of countries that will not go along with this this approach. So there needs to be government buying, there needs to be a government readiness to engage and to invest. So that's certainly the first criteria, and that may involve readiness to look at maybe changing or creating an enabling environment in the country, be it through changing policies, adapting policies, or legal frameworks, domesticating or signing international conventions like the Kampala Convention, for example, for countries in Africa. So that I think is also an important criteria. Then I suppose part of the equation would be whether there is a context that lends itself to working towards solutions. So I would imagine that context where there is an active conflict, for example, will not be considered. More context where transition is already either felt to be enriched or already kind of being seen. And then I suppose another important criteria will be around the overall capacity of the international community to do that work. So the resident coordinators, the UN country teams, but also the NGO presence and engagement, maybe the perspective of the donor countries, and especially the development actors and development funding ready to come in those contexts, because obviously without that, also a big piece of this puzzle will be missing. So I think that's probably what will be driving the selection, and I would assume that there will be a bit of an attempt to get a geographical balance, at least most regions represented, and a few parameters like that. But I think those that I've highlighted would probably be top of the list. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerome. I think this again goes to you, but Mark, you had earlier mentioned that some of the entry points are quite vague, but then again, we hear that the team that compiled the agenda is open to making amendments to this. One would then think, okay, if they are vague and they're open to amendments, how can then the different IDP advocates, stakeholders, and civil society organizations engage on making these amendments in an expedient way, I would say? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think it was Jerome who said they were vague, but I'll go along with it. I accept that as well.
I can add up after if you want, Mark.
Sure, but I think look, the action agenda itself is, as a document, is is complete and not complete, is finished. And so there won't be amendments and edits to the document, but in terms of how it's implemented, there's a lot that can be developed and established. And I think, yeah, in part because some of the recommendations are a bit vague, it means it's not so clear how yet they'll be implemented. So it gives, on the one hand, it can be seen as a challenge. On the other hand, it means that if actors, NGOs, civil society, researchers, academics come through with concrete ways to advance some of these vague recommendations around inclusion or vague recommendations around supporting governments to include IDPs and development plans, that kind of thing. So yeah, the implementation is where the openings are, but I'll leave Jerome to give any comments on that as well.
Yeah, I can quickly. I don't know if things can be amended. As you said, Mark, the document itself at least is finalized, but things can be clarified, things can be unpacked, specified, and it's the nature of those processes and those documents. I can see, I've seen exactly the same kind of things with the Global Compact on Refugees and the work that I've been doing. Those kind of documents that mention actions, groups, initiatives cannot include detailed TORs for everything. So there is always a need to, you take a part and it needs to be analyzed how it can be implemented, and sometimes that means reframing a bit, adapting, or pushing a bit the timeline, or prioritizing as well. But that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's also it's better to do that than to close your eyes and try to implement things that force boxes into smaller boxes, and that doesn't fit. It's also a realistic approach to try to ensure that you're doing something that works. And it's really in the nature of this kind of processes, I think. Over.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So with us, there are other two Genida Network members who had two key questions. We have Richard Obedi and Tata Sanjo. I will let Richard Obedi go first with his question. I know he typed it in the question, but he would like to ask his question. Richard, I'm allowing you to talk. Over to you.
Yes, are you getting me?
Yes, there is background noise where you are.
Yes,
we are enjoying the music.
No, there's a plantation party taking place.
Okay.
But I'll try to be a bit loud. Yes,
okay.
Very good presentation by Mark, Ivana, and Jerome. I want to dwell on the structures that Jerome alluded to. The coordination, the regional coordination role, the special advisors, and all these frameworks that we have. He has even just mentioned the Global Compact, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, let me bring it onto the issue of IDPs. Actually, the Kampala Convention, even Uganda as a country, this framework was formulated in Uganda, but they have even failed to deploy it. Leave alone even the Uganda national IDP policy, it has not been exhaustively deployed to actually speak to the realities or address the concerns of the IDPs. But here we are trying to create more structures instead of tackling the problems head on. Jerome, we took government to court, especially people whom IDP camps were established on their land, and the ruling is on Monday. So that because somebody within the office of the Prime Minister sat on his job, there were the areas where IDP camps were established, these are not government land, others were individual land, communal land, private land. And here you have a situation whereby you have over 1,036 graves in the areas of people. They do not know the owners of the dead bodies. The owners of the land do not know the owners of the dead bodies. You just look at that intricacy. It's a transitional justice issue there. The owners of the land cannot use this land. But instead of us addressing these problems head on, we are creating structures and frameworks and treaties and standards. You've actually used the right word, standards, initiatives, all those well connotated words, but they actually do nothing in the life of the IDPs. Another case is in Soroti, whereby why can even Soroti district or Soroti city, using the council, relocate over 1,000 IDPs in Soroti town? Even the political leadership, yeah, you mentioned, one of you mentioned the issue of political goodwill. It's not there. And these people were displaced since 1989. And of course, series of displacement factors. War, like when Alice Nakwena War, the Holy Spirit movement, war, and the Karamojong invasion. But they're in Nemaland. But even Soroti authorities, political and the technical leadership cannot relocate them. The whole of Texas sub-region, they cannot even find land, whether by the roadside, and relocate these people. What is the problem really? Yeah. Thank you.
Richard, thank you so much for that. I guess his question is basically, why are we creating more structures, more frameworks or systems in place, and yet those that are there are actually not working? You'll allow me go through the network members who are here. They raise their questions, and then you can go ahead and respond. Then there's also a question from one of our graduates for the Janida e-learning course, that is Janet Jibichi. She also has a question. I'll come to her last. Let me move on to Tata Sanjo. Tata, you had a question. Let me let you ask.
Yeah. Yes. Can you get me, please?
Yes, we can.
All right. Yes. In fact, I want to begin by thanking the panelists for the wonderful presentations on the internal displacement situation in Africa, which continues to be preoccupying. I was just curious to say that one of the major challenges in looking for durable solutions to forced displacement in Africa, especially IDPs, is linked to this doctrine of state sovereignty. And we actually see the UN partner, the UN and her partners working on the ground, especially in terms of monitoring and then early warning systems when it comes to disasters that are caused, to displacements that are caused by disasters. But when it comes to conflict, of course, we see those countries like Ethiopia, the Tigray situation in DRC, it's there in Nigeria or Boko Haram, and then internal instability, and increasingly in Cameroon. So how can the UN system really go beyond this doctrine of state sovereignty to hold governments in Africa accountable in addressing the forced displacement problem? Because yeah, I know it will be embarrassing to say the UN system holding governments in Africa accountable, but we know that most of the African governments they roll with an iron fist, and so even though the people who gave them the mandate continue to complain, it's difficult for them to protest peacefully, because they would always they will always bring in the military, and the situation would degenerate. So I was just wondering, how can the UN system actually work closely with African governments to ensure that the drivers of conflicts that result in the massive displacement are reduced to the barest minimum, so as to find a durable solution to the IDP situation? I do understand that there's a Kampala Convention, but how are we holding these countries compelled to be able to implement the Kampala Convention? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tata. We have taken note of that. Miss Nicolene, I see you're also here. I'll give you some time if you have a question. Miss Nicolene, over to you.
Okay.
She is also one of the network members for Janida, and she's based in Cameroon. I hope I'm correct.
Yes, Francis, you are correct. I've been listening with a lot of interest, all the presentations and how they highlight the different issues within the African continent and their specificity. And just like Tata said, remember when we did the symposium, I raised the issue of sovereignty, because this is where you have a country that reports on internal displacement by virtue of the Kampala Convention, but in practice, nothing is done. And who violates the sovereignty of a sovereign state to come in and see if the actions are being taken or not? We did, when the crisis in Cameroon just started, for example, we did a huge survey together with Plan International and UNICEF to on the needs of school-age children who were moving into Yaoundé from the restive regions in unprecedented numbers. But that result has never seen the light of day because government said they shouldn't, and they couldn't dare. And the situation has remained like this. These children have continued to live in under very precarious conditions. They don't have civil status documents like the birth certificates that they lost in the course of fleeing from the conflicts. Some have not been to school since then. Some have gone to school and have not been able to write end of course exam because they don't have these certificates. So I really come back like Tata on the issue of sovereignty. How do we how do we reconcile sovereignty and the rights of internally displaced persons? Thank you so very much again for this very educative and insightful presentations.
Thank you, Ms. Nicoline. Appreciate you for that. Just to add on to that, earlier in the year, we had a conference on IDPs in the Sahel, and one of the papers that was being presented was on the identity of internally displaced persons. I think this would go to Ivana, because one of the challenges the paper was raising was that not all people are actually registered. And what measures does, let's say, IDMC put in place to ensure that even those who are not registered are captured in the statistics? Because if they're not captured in the statistics, then issues like budgeting are left hanging. Okay, I will move on to one of our graduates for the Genida e-learning course, Janet. She also had a question. Janet, I am letting you ask your question, and then we shall go over to the panelists to respond to the questions that we have. Over to you, Janet. Janet, can you hear us?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity, Francis. Yes, I'm currently doing a research on internal displacement and specifically development-induced displacement, and with focus on international financial institutions, the role of international financial institutions. I'm interested in how the accountability and how the role of international financial institutions can be strengthened in order to address the issue of displacement caused by the projects that they are financing. Given that I've also seen that the action plan actually mentions how the international financial institutions can be engaged in devising durable solutions. I've come across the World Bank standards and the IFC standards, which have actually been adopted by other financial institutions, the bilateral ones like the European Union development, various DFIs within the within Europe, and they have adopted, they have set the standard for, not the standard, but they have provided guidance in the development of their involuntary resettlement policies. Now the issue comes with the accountability mechanisms that are within the financial institutions that have still face challenges on the issues of the binding nature of their decisions and the legal status of the policies. Like they are more of guiding, and it will come to the issue, since the issue of internal displacement as presented is a national responsibility. It comes back to the national responsibility. But now, how will we strengthen the international finance institutions in helping address the development-induced displacement? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. I will now move over to you, our esteemed panelists. I don't know who's going to respond to what first. Yes.
I think Mark is going to respond first.
Yeah, no, happy to give some initial answers. So on the issue of creating new structures at the global level and while at national and local level, there's still obstacles to making progress. I mean, it's an extremely important point, and I think so. Two things. One, I think that's why it's great. It's encouraging that the special advisor is really digging into specific country experiences and looking at making tangible progress for people who are stuck in protracted displacement, because the process of the high level panel of which I was a part was very broad and global in its outlook, and looked at systematic issues. But this effort to dig into specific blockages and obstacles at the country and local level, I think is an important approach. So we'll see where it if it bears fruit. At the same time, when it comes to the UN system, just from my own research and analysis in assessing responses to displacement, one of the main issues at the country level is that because there's no because it's a shared responsibility among different UN agencies, and there's no one agency that has the ultimate responsibility. There's often a lot of confusion, overlap, finger pointing, turf wars, lack of leadership and accountability. And so sometimes having a clear point of accountability at the headquarters level needs to happen, so they can filter to better clarity and collaboration and coherence at the national level. Whether that happens or not, we'll see, but that's the intention. Just very briefly on the issue of Janet, that you mentioned on development-induced displacement, it's a really important issue that to be honest, the high level panel did not engage. It was already a very long report, and so they made choices about sort of where they would certain topics that they weren't in a position to cover. And I think because of that, it's also not so prominent in the action agenda. But it's a gap that will benefit from the kind of research and work you're doing. But interested to hear other thoughts on that. And then just on the question of state sovereignty, it's a really significant critical piece that the members of the high level panel and others grappled with constantly. And the I think the something what the panel members tried to do in their report was to highlight the issue, to and to put forward recommendations that either national or where relevant international legal authorities should investigate and prosecute those who do forcibly displace populations or commit other violations of IHL. And it's but it's something that there was a lot of different opinions on if it's appropriate to take that aggressive tact in terms of investigation and prosecution, or if that would back states more into a corner, and it's better to facilitate sort of state-to-state engagement among states as peers to kind of create sort of positive incentives of looking at who's behaving well and to get others to model that. But it's an issue that frankly wasn't completely cracked by the effort that the panel went through. but very curious to hear other thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
If you want, I can jump in briefly to also react to some of the questions. So there was the one which you attributed to me a moment ago, which was about unregistered IDPs and how to include them in the statistics. So quickly on that, at least at IDMC, we do include even unregistered IDPs in our statistics. Obviously, it's much more difficult to capture them, but we are looking at a very large range of sources. So our statistics should be including all sort of IDPs in host areas, registered, unregistered, and so on. Again, if the IDPs do not want to be identified as IDPs and they are not included in any sort of report, then of course there is nothing we can do about it. It's their every right not to be included if they do not wish so, and then obviously they are not reflected there. But overall, we are using a large range of sources, so hopefully a lot of unregistered IDPs is also included there. The second point, and I very much agree with what Mark was saying on the issue of national sovereignty and how to kind of support states in implementing some of these recommendations, or the Kampala Convention, which one of the person mentioned in the questions, how to make countries to implement these instruments. Of course, these countries, I mean, nobody can force the countries to do that, but it's great actually to see how some countries are implementing it. Like Niger, a few years ago, adopted a law on internal displacement, which is a very comprehensive law. And again, it could be interesting to see and learn from Niger how it was done in the country and how this could be replicated in other countries in the continent. And Niger is just one example. There are plenty of other good examples. So it would be good to just explore that and learn and see how to implement these sort of recommendations and so on in other areas. And last thing, which was on the first question, actually, I wanted to react to regarding the issue of regional and kind of global mechanisms, how to again, I mean the person who asked the question. So just to say that if you want to have a look on more sort of local solutions and solutions led by local communities and by the government, there is actually a very nice list on the IDMC website. There is a new sort of part of the website. It's got a lot of local practices, a link to durable solutions to displacement. And I presented one in the presentation, which was on the Dandavak activity, which is actually locally led thing. And it's perfectly linked to what you were saying on land ownership and kind of resolving all these issues. So if you want, you can have a look. There are plenty of examples of locally led initiatives, and maybe there will be something useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Jerome.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try also to tackle all the questions. I think they are a bit connected. The sovereignty issue is maybe the connection. So on the the mushrooming of processes and structures, I agree with you that it sometimes appears to be, and it is often not necessarily efficient, and spending a lot of money with not always the expected results. I think the objective of those structures is also we have those because they're not also country focused. The idea is to develop dynamics that are global or regional. So framework that do not address only issues at the local and country level, but that try to create a dynamic across the board. And here, one of the origins of the high level panel, I think Mark reminded us, and so the origin also of the action agenda, is the fact that you had the New York Declaration in 2016, and then the two compacts on refugees and migration. And there was the feeling that IDPs were falling through the cracks and that they were not getting the international attention that they need. And that's an important element of making sure that rights are respected, the conventions, commitments are respected, is whether or not there is international attention on countries that may not go in this direction. So that was one of the reasons for creating those processes was this. But that doesn't, eliminate the fact that there's still people in specific contexts that do not see solutions coming and do not see the dividends and the results from all those big processes. You mentioned transitional justice, and I think this is also an element that is maybe not enough addressed in the action agenda. The piece in the nexus. There's a lot of emphasis on the development. I've heard the special advisor thinking about the peace element, but I think there's a lot more to be done there. And there's also a number of NGOs that can help and bring this dimension. So that's definitely something that should be looked at more. Now the link with the sovereignty and this whole idea that UN may be sometimes seen as a waste of money. I think it's also important to recognize that in the world that we are, it's a world made of sovereign states. The UN cannot be expected to do and should not be doing what states should be doing, should be helping them in some instances, but the UN cannot replace states in fulfilling their roles and their duties towards their own citizens, especially. I remember when I was a student reading an article saying that the UN is what states make of it, and that's it's also true. So one element is also what member states do to put pressure on countries to fulfill their obligations. And that's back to the international attention aspects. And there, there's a number of pressure points that can be applied from funding and other elements. That ties to the accountability discussion. And here, within the UN, imperfect systems, of course, but, the Human Rights Council, the UPR, you have a number of pressure points that can be applied. You have the regional mechanism, the African Union, advocacy that is also developed by the UN, and then you have also sometimes incentives that can be developed, especially when you have the IFIs and the World Bank getting in, at least on the refugee side. We're not yet seeing that on the IDP side, but having resources made available, sometimes not necessarily with conditionality, but at least with incentives towards actually respecting rights, can be a way to push countries in the right direction. Something that Ivana was alluding to is this notion of peer-to-peer learning. And that's something that the high-level panel had pushed quite a lot, and I don't think it's been taken on board too much by the action agenda, trying to make sure that states can learn from each other and that maybe they can learn from other actors as well, in terms of how to implement the right policies and develop the right enabling environment conducive to solutions. So that's how it's those sovereignty issues are being addressed. I don't think there is an appetite or a space for scope for the UN to go beyond the sovereignty issue, but there are approaches to accountability, and one that is not always also pursued correctly is to make sure that those states that are responsible for displacement are not, let's say, retributed by development projects or development money while they are engaging in those kind of behavior. On the role of IFIs, I've touched on it a bit, but on the displacement related to development projects, I actually remember a very good presentation about India at one of the IDMC conferences a few years ago. And it's an important topic. I would, it's not exactly mentioned in the action agenda, but the action agenda is referring very clearly to the guiding principles of internal displacement, which looks at that issue, and even saying that one of the aim is to promote the understanding and strengthen the guiding principle. So I would hope that any engagement from the action agenda would follow the guiding principles on those aspects. But probably further details, that's one of the elements where further details might be needed to clarify how this is approached. Thank you. I hope I have covered most of the questions.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Thank you, everyone. I know we are pressed for time. We've gone 30 minutes over the time that we had scheduled for the webinar. So I will wind this up and request our representative on the panel, the Genida representative on the panel, that is Professor Inez, just to close, and then we can call it a day. Professor Inez, over to you to close the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much to everybody who make an effort to attend this webinar. We are in different time zones, but being here means how important our is to this meeting. I continue stressing that in order to have this project working, we really need to share the data. And I hope that what Ivana, for instance, has presented to us is possible, is available to everybody, because this is one of our interests when we talk about studies or analyzing anything that we intend to produce policies or support our governments in terms of policies. For me, for myself, it was really a great pleasure being with you, and I hope to see you again in other occasion. Can be this year or next year, and it would be also interesting if you could have an opportunity to realize it physically, because using internet sometimes we have internet connections, so that sometimes it's difficult to follow what he's saying. So it's really important to discuss physically. And thank you very much for everybody.
Thank you so much, Professor Inez. Look out for the report. I will share it on social media and via email, and then the video will also be edited and re-uploaded on YouTube. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Let us keep in touch. Bye from the Genida Network.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
A good weekend.
Thank you, Francis.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.